It was supposed to be just a special dinner between father and son, but something unbelievable happens before their eyes. In the middle of the restaurant, a little waiter appears, and he is the exact copy of his son. The revelation brings back a tragic story. The birth that took his wife and supposedly one of their babies. Now, with his heart in pieces, he needs to understand who lied and the reason for this unforgivable betrayal. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, tell us which city you're watching us from, and we'll keep going. It was a Friday night like any other in the bustling city. The streets of the Jardins neighborhood were busy, with people leaving work and looking to relax after a long week. However, for Michael, that night was about to become a turning point in his life. Michael, a successful 45-year-old businessman, decided to take his 10-year-old son Lucas out for dinner at one of the city's finest restaurants. Bistro Estrella do Mar was known for its sophisticated cuisine and elegant ambiance, perfect for a special evening between father and son. As the luxury car drove through the brightly lit streets, Michael watched his son in the rearview mirror. Lucas was quiet, but his eyes were bright with anticipation. It was moments like these that Michael treasured most since the loss of his wife, Carol, a decade ago. "Are you excited to try that seafood dish you saw on Instagram?" Michael asked, trying to start a conversation. Lucas nodded, a shy smile forming on his face. "Yes, Dad. It sounds amazing. Do you think you'll like it too?" Michael smiled back. "I'm sure you do. Your palate is getting more refined than mine, young man." Arriving at the restaurant, they were greeted by a helpful valet and quickly shown to a table near the window. The interior of Bistro Estrella do Mar was a sight to behold: soft lights, pleasant background music, and a decor that mixed modern elements with classic touches. Michael helped Lucas settle in and then sat down, picking up the menu. As they discussed the options, they didn't notice a young waiter approaching. "Good evening, gentlemen. May I help you with the menu?" It was at that moment that Michael's world seemed to freeze. As he looked up from his menu, he was met with a sight that took his breath away. The waiter, a boy who looked no more than 10 or 11 years old, looked exactly like Lucas. Not just similar, but exactly the same, as if they were reflections of each other. Michael blinked several times, unable to believe what he was seeing. His heart raced and a feeling of dizziness washed over him. Beside him, Lucas had also noticed the extraordinary resemblance. The two boys stared at each other, open-mouthed, as if they were in front of a mirror. "Father," Lucas whispered, his voice shaking slightly. "He's just like me." The young waiter looked equally stunned. His eyes, the same deep shade of blue as Lucas's, were wide with surprise and confusion. Michael tried to compose himself, his mind working frantically to find a logical explanation for this surreal scene. What's your name?" he managed to ask, his voice hoarse with emotion. The boy hesitated for a moment before answering. "Samuel, sir." Samuel. Such a common name, and yet at that moment it carried a meaning that Michael couldn't fully comprehend. He looked from Samuel to Lucas and back again, noting every identical detail. The shape of his face, the slightly upturned nose, even the way he stood was the same. "Samuel, do you work here?" Michael asked, trying to maintain his composure. The boy looked uncomfortable at the question. I just help out every now and then. My mom owns the restaurant." At this moment, a middle-aged woman hurriedly approached the table. Her eyes were wide with worry, and she placed a protective hand on Samuel's shoulder. "Is everything okay here?" she asked, her gaze flicking between Michael and the two boys. Michael recognized her immediately, even though he hadn't seen her in years. "Emma? Emma?" The woman seemed to tense up even more when she heard her name. "Michael. Michael. I didn't know you frequented the Starfish." The tone of her voice and the way she squeezed Samuel's shoulder did not go unnoticed by Michael. There was something there, a secret, an untold story that was beginning to unfold before his eyes. "Emma, is this your son?" Michael asked, gesturing toward Samuel. Emma hesitated for a moment before answering. "Yes, Samuel is my son." Michael felt a wave of conflicting emotions wash over him. Joy, confusion, anger, hope, all mixed together in a whirlwind that threatened to engulf him. He looked back at Samuel, and a painful memory flashed through his mind. 10 years ago in a hospital room, a grim-faced doctor gave him the news that would change his life forever. "I'm so sorry, sir. Your wife, she didn't make it through the birth, and one of the twins, we couldn't save him." Twins. The word echoed in his mind like a silent scream. Michael had always believed that only Lucas had survived, but now, faced with this child who looked exactly like his son, all the certainties he had built up over a decade began to crumble. Lucas, sensing the growing tension, tugged on his father's shirt sleeve. "Dad, what's going on? Why is he just like me?" Michael had no answers, at least not yet. But he knew one thing for sure. That night at the Starfish Bistro was just the beginning of a journey that would change their lives forever. Emma, sensing the emotional turmoil that had set in, tried to ease the situation. "Michael, perhaps it would be better if we talked another time. This is not the place or the time for—" But Michael interrupted her, his voice steady despite the inner turmoil. "No, Emma, I think this is exactly the time. There's something you need to tell me, isn't there?" The silence that followed was deafening. The other diners in the restaurant seemed oblivious to the drama unfolding in that small circle. But for Michael, Lucas, Samuel, and Emma, the world around them had disappeared. Samuel, clearly confused and scared, looked to Emma for guidance. "Mom, what's going on? Who are these people?" Emma took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment as if seeking strength. When she opened them again, there was a mixture of resignation and fear in her gaze. "Samuel, please go to the kitchen and stay there until I call you," she said softly. The boy hesitated, taking one last look at Lucas before reluctantly stepping away. Lucas, in turn, clung to his father's arm, as if afraid he might disappear. Too. Michael, sensing his son's confusion and fear, tried to remain calm. "Lucas, it's okay. We need to talk to Emma for a moment. Can you wait here at the table?" Lucas nodded, though his eyes were still fixed in the direction Samuel had disappeared. Emma gestured to a more private area of the restaurant. "Let's talk over there, Michael, away from prying ears." As they walked away from the table, Michael took one last look at Lucas, who looked small and vulnerable, sitting alone. He felt a pang of guilt for leaving him, even for a few minutes, but he knew it was necessary. In the private area, Emma and Michael stared at each other in silence for a few moments. There was so much to be said, so many questions to be asked, that it was hard to know where to begin. "Emma," Michael finally spoke, his voice shaking slightly. "Please tell me it's not what I think. Tell me that boy isn't—" Emma looked down, unable to meet Michael's accusing gaze. "Michael, I'm so sorry. I never meant for you to find out like this." Emma's words confirmed Michael's worst fears. His legs felt weak, and he had to hold on to a nearby chair to keep from falling. "How?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How is that possible? They told me he was dead." Emma finally found the courage to look Michael in the eye. "It's a long and complicated story, Michael. A story that involves lies, fear, and love. A lot of love." Michael felt a wave of anger wash over him. "Love? You call that love? To separate me from my son for 10 years? Please, Michael," Emma begged. "Don't judge before you know the whole truth. There are things you don't know, things Carol—" The mention of his late wife's name made Michael fall silent abruptly. "Carol? What does she have to do with this?" Emma took a deep breath, as if preparing to dive into deep, turbulent waters. Carol knew Michael. She knew everything. Michael's already shattered world seemed to completely crumble at those words. The idea that his beloved wife could be involved in something so unthinkable was too much for him to process. "I don't believe you," he said. But his voice betrayed the doubt that was beginning to settle in his heart. Emma took Michael's hand, a gesture he couldn't bring himself to reject. "Michael, I know this is hard to believe, but I promise I'll tell you everything. You deserve to know the truth. Samuel deserves to know the truth." Michael looked back at the table where Lucas sat, alone and confused. His son— No. his children. The reality of this new situation hit him full force. "What now?" he asked, more to himself than to Emma. "What do we do now?" Emma followed Michael's gaze. "Now," she said softly, "we begin to fix what was broken 10 years ago, together." Michael nodded slowly, knowing that nothing in his life would be the same from that moment on. The quiet dinner he had planned had turned into the beginning of a journey that would change the fate of two families forever. As they walked back to the table, where Lucas was eagerly waiting for them, Michael knew he was about to embark on the most challenging and exciting adventure of his life. A search not only for answers, but for redemption, reconciliation, and most of all, the love of a family that should never have been torn apart. The days that followed the meeting at the Bistro Estrella do Mar were a whirlwind of emotions for Michael. Each morning he woke up hoping that it had all been an elaborate dream, only to be hit again by reality. He had another son, an identical twin of Lucas, of whom he had been deprived for 10 long years. Michael could barely concentrate on his work at the company. Sitting in his office at the top of a skyscraper in the city's financial district, he found himself constantly looking at the photo of Lucas on his desk, imagining what it would be like to have an identical photo of Samuel next to it. "Sir?" His secretary's voice brought him back to reality. "Mr. Accounting is waiting for the 2 p.m. meeting." Michael nodded absently. "Thanks, Anna. Tell him I'll be there in a minute." As soon as the door closed, Michael picked up his cell phone and reread Emma's message for the 100th time. "Michael, I know you have a lot of questions. Can we meet tonight at the cafe near Ibirapuera Park at 8 p.m.? I promise to explain everything." He replied with a simple, "I'll be there," and stood up, straightening his tie before heading off to the meeting. But his mind was far from the numbers and graphs that would be discussed. It was focused on the meeting he would have that evening and the revelations that could change his life forever. The rest of the day passed in a blur. When he finally arrived at the cafe, Michael found Emma already seated at a table in the back, away from prying ears. She looked as if she had aged years since their encounter at the restaurant, with dark circles under her eyes and a look of constant worry. "Thank you for coming," she said softly as Michael sat down. "It's not like I had a choice," he replied, his voice harsher than he intended. "Emma, I need to know. What happened that night? Why did they tell me only Lucas survived?" Emma took a deep breath, her fingers fiddling nervously with the coffee cup in front of her. "Michael, first of all, you need to understand that Carol, your wife, was trying to protect you, all of you." Michael felt his heart clench at the mention of his late wife's name. "Protect? From what?" "Your father's," Emma replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The mention of Daniel made Michael sit up straighter in his chair. His father had been a powerful and feared man in the city's business circles, known as much for his business acumen as for his questionable methods. "What does my father have to do with this?" Michael asked, a feeling of apprehension growing in his chest. Emma looked around as if afraid of being overheard before continuing. "A few weeks before the birth, Carol discovered some documents in Daniel's office. Evidence of illegal dealings, money laundering, maybe even worse. She was terrified, Michael. Your father would do anything to maintain his empire." Michael felt his blood run cold. He had always known that his father was not a man of integrity, but he had never imagined the extent of his illicit activities. "Carol came to me," Emma continued. "She was afraid that if she confronted Daniel or told you, something terrible would happen, especially with the babies on the way." "But why separate the twins?" Michael asked, his voice choked with emotion. Emma looked down, as if the weight of the truth was too much to bear. "It was Carol's idea. She believed that if anything happened to her, at least one of the babies would be safe, out of Daniel's reach. She made me promise that if the worst came to the worst, I would take one of the twins and raise him or her as my own." Michael felt hot tears streaming down his face. The thought that Carol, his beloved wife, had carried such a heavy burden in her final days was almost unbearable. "But why not tell me after my father is gone?" he asked, referring to Daniel's death 3 years after the twins were born. Emma sighed deeply. "At first it was fear that your father's associates might carry out some threat he'd made. Then it was guilt, Michael." How could I show up years later and say that I'd raised your son as my own? That I'd denied you and Lucas the chance to know him? The silence that followed was heavy, fraught with years of secrets and regrets. Michael struggled to process everything he had heard, to reconcile the image of the loving wife he had known with the desperate woman who had made such a drastic decision. "What about Samuel?" he finally asked. "Does he know anything?" Emma shook her head. "No, to him I'm his mother and his only family. He doesn't know anything about you or Lucas." Michael felt a pang of pain as he thought of his son, who had grown up without knowing him, without knowing his true identity. "We have to tell him, Emma. He deserves to know the truth." "I know," she replied, tears shining in her eyes. "But I'm scared, Michael. Scared of how he'll react, scared of losing him." Michael reached out, taking Emma's hand in a gesture of understanding. Despite the anger and pain he felt, he knew she was also a victim of circumstance. "We'll do this together," he said softly. "For Samuel, for Lucas, and for Carol's memory." Emma nodded, a small smile of gratitude on her lips. As they walked out of the cafe, Michael felt the weight of a decade of lies and secrets begin to lift. The road ahead would be difficult, full of painful conversations and emotional adjustments, but for the first time in years, he felt hope. On the way home, Michael stopped the car in front of a park where he used to take Lucas when he was younger. Watching the children playing in the late afternoon light, he imagined what it would have been like to see his two sons growing up together, sharing laughter and mischief. Taking out his phone, he opened the photo gallery and stared at a picture of Lucas smiling. "Soon," he muttered to himself, "soon we'll have a picture of the two of you together." With a deep sigh, Michael started the car. He knew that the conversation he would have with Lucas that night would be one of the most difficult of his life. How could he explain to a 10-year-old boy that he had a twin brother? How could he apologize for a separation he himself had no knowledge of? As he drove through the city's brightly lit streets, Michael mentally prepared himself for the challenges ahead. The truth, no matter how painful, was the first step toward healing the wounds of the past and building a new future for his newfound family. What Michael didn't know was that as he headed home, other forces were already at work. People who would rather certain secrets remain buried and who would do anything to maintain the status quo. In a dark office somewhere in the city, a phone rang. A deep voice answered, "Yes." On the other end of the line, a nervous voice answered, "Sir, we have a problem." Michael found out about the other boy. There was a tense pause before the deep voice replied, "I understand. Keep them under surveillance. We cannot allow the full truth to come out. You know what to do." The call ended, leaving the dark promise that Michael's journey to find the truth was far from over. In fact, it had barely begun. The mansion, located in one of the city's most elegant neighborhoods, was immersed in a tense silence that night. Michael, sitting on the edge of Lucas's bed, watched his son with a mixture of love and apprehension. How could he explain to a 10-year-old that his life was about to change drastically? "Lucas," Michael began, his voice soft. "Remember that kid we saw at the restaurant? The one who was just like you?" Lucas nodded, his blue eyes fixed on his father. "Yes, father. Samuel. He's my brother, isn't he?" The direct question took Michael by surprise. He had always known Lucas was perceptive, but he sometimes forgot how observant his son was. "Yes, son," Michael replied, feeling a lump in his throat. "Samuel is your twin brother." Lucas was silent for a moment, processing the information. "But why doesn't he live with us? Why have we never heard of him before?" Michael took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "It's a complicated story, Lucas. There were problems when you were born. People who wanted to hurt us. Samuel was taken to protect us." "Protect us from what?" Lucas asked, his voice shaking slightly. Michael hesitated. How could he explain the dangers of the business world, the veiled threats, the power plays that had torn his family apart? "From bad people, son. People who didn't want us to be happy." Lucas frowned, clearly dissatisfied with the vague answer. "What now? Is Samuel going to come live with us?" The question hit Michael like a punch in the stomach. It was something he himself didn't yet know how to answer. "I don't know, Lucas. This is all very new. We'll need time to understand how things will work from now on. Lucas hugged the pillow, a gesture Michael recognized as a sign of insecurity. You'll like him more than me. Michael's heart broke at the words. He pulled Lucas into a tight hug, feeling the tears his son was trying to hide. Never, Lucas, never. You and Samuel are equally important to me. My love for you will never change. As he comforted Lucas, Michael wondered how Samuel was handling the news. Emma had promised to tell the boy the truth that very night. Across town, in the modest apartment above the Estrella do Mar bistro, Emma was facing her own emotional battle. Samuel was sitting on the couch in the living room, his eyes wide with shock after hearing Emma's revelation. "So, you're not my real mother?" Samuel asked, his voice barely audible. Emma felt her heart shatter. "Samuel, I am your mother in every way that matters. I raised you, I loved you, I cared for you all these years. But you lied to me," Samuel burst out, tears streaming down his face. "My whole life has been a lie." Emma tried to get closer, but Samuel pulled away. "It wasn't a lie, my love, it was a way to protect you." "Protect me?" Samuel repeated in disbelief. "Protect me from what? From my real father? From my brother?" Emma felt the weight of a decade of secrets crushing her chest. "Samuel, please try to understand. Your birth mother, Carol, she feared for your safety. There were dangerous people." "What now?" Samuel interrupted. "Are these people still dangerous? Why are they telling me this now?" Emma hesitated. How could she explain that the meeting at the restaurant had been an accident of fate? That neither she nor Michael had planned for things to happen this way? "Things have changed, Samuel," she finally said. "Michael, your biological father, he wants to meet you. He wants to be a part of your life." Samuel was silent for a long moment, his young face a mask of conflicting emotions. "What if I don't want to meet him? What if I don't want to change my life?" The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded with implications. Emma felt a mixture of relief and guilt. Relief that Samuel didn't want to leave her right away, and guilt that she felt that relief. "No one is going to force you to do anything you don't want to do, my love," Emma said softly. "But maybe it would be good to give it a chance, to get to know your father, your brother." Samuel wiped his tears with the back of his hand. "Can I think about it?" Emma nodded, resisting the urge to hug him. She knew Samuel needed space to process all of this. "Of course, my love. Take all the time you need." Meanwhile, in a dingy office in the city center, a tense meeting was underway. 3 men in suits, all with grave expressions, were discussing, in low voices. "This can't come to light," said the eldest of them, a man with gray hair and cold eyes. "If the truth about what happened 10 years ago comes out, everything we've worked for will be at risk." "What do you suggest we do, sir?" asked one of the other men. Mr., whom Michael knew only as his chief accountant, smiled humorlessly. "We need to make sure Michael doesn't find out the whole truth, and if that's what it takes, well, accidents happen every day in a big city like this." The other 2 men exchanged nervous glances, but nodded in agreement. This game was about to get a lot more dangerous. In the days that followed, Michael tried to establish a routine that included Samuel in his life. He invited the boy and Emma for lunch and walks in the park, always respecting the space and time that Samuel needed to adapt to the new reality. Lucas, for his part, was torn between curiosity about his newfound brother and fear of losing his place in his father's life. During one of their meetings in the park, while Michael was talking to Emma, Lucas hesitantly approached Samuel. "So, do you like video games?" Lucas asked, kicking a pebble on the ground. Samuel, who had been watching a group of ducks on a nearby lake, turned to Lucas. "I like it. Do you have any cool consoles?" "I have a PlayStation 5, Lucas replied, a small smile forming on his face. "Want to play sometime?" Samuel hesitated for a moment before nodding. That might be cool. That small, seemingly insignificant exchange was the first step toward building a relationship between the brothers. Michael, watching from afar, felt a surge of hope. However, not everything was rosy. Michael began to notice strange things happening around him. Important documents mysteriously disappearing from his office, anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night, the constant feeling of being watched. One afternoon, as he was leaving a company meeting, Michael was approached by a woman he didn't recognize. She seemed nervous, constantly looking over her shoulder. "Sir," she whispered, "be careful. Not everyone will be happy with what you are discovering. The truth about that night is darker than you can imagine." Before Michael could question her, the woman disappeared into the crowd, leaving him with more questions than answers. At night, lying in his bed, Michael couldn't sleep. The mysterious woman's words echoed in his mind, mixing with fragments of memories and doubts. What dark truth was still hidden? Who were the people who didn't want him to find out? He stood up and walked to Lucas's room, watching his son sleep peacefully. The determination to protect his family, now expanded to include Samuel, grew in his chest. "I'm going to find out the truth," Michael muttered to himself, "for Lucas, for Samuel, and for Carol's memory, no matter what the cost." What Michael didn't know was that his words had been picked up by a small listening device hidden in Lucas's room. Somewhere in the city, someone was listening and planning their next move. The search for the truth was just beginning, and the dangers lurking in the shadows were about to reveal themselves. Michael was about to discover that some secrets come at too high a price, and that the line between protection and destruction can be dangerously thin. The sun had barely risen when Michael woke with a start. His cell phone vibrated insistently on the bedside table. With his heart racing, he answered the call. "Michael, it's Emma. Sorry to call so early, but Samuel is missing." Emma's words hit him like a punch to the gut. Michael jumped out of bed, already searching for his clothes. "What do you mean you disappeared? Since when?" Emma's voice shook on the other end of the line. "I went to wake him up for school and he wasn't in his room. The window was open and... Michael, there's a letter. I think he ran away." "I'm coming over," Michael replied, already leaving the room. In the hallway, he found Lucas, who had been woken up by the commotion. "Dad? What's going on?" Michael hesitated for a moment, but decided to be honest. "Samuel is missing, son. I need to go help Emma look for him." Lucas's eyes widened in concern. "Can I come along? I want to help." Despite the urgency of the situation, Michael felt a surge of pride in his son. "Sure, we'll go together. Get dressed quickly." As he drove through the still empty city streets, Michael couldn't shake the thought that Samuel's disappearance might be more than just a teenage runaway. The veiled threats, the suspicious looks, it all seemed to be leading up to something bigger and more sinister. Arriving at Emma's apartment, they found her in tears, holding a crumpled piece of paper. "It's his handwriting," she said, handing the paper to Michael. "Read it." Michael unfolded the letter with trembling hands. "Emma, or should I say mother, I can't live this lie anymore. I need to find out who I really am. Don't worry about me, and please don't look for me. I'll come back when I'm ready. Samuel." Michael felt the weight of guilt crush him. If he hadn't insisted on getting closer, if he had given Samuel more time to process everything. "Let's find him," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Lucas, do you know where Samuel hangs out?" Lucas, who had been quiet since they arrived, nodded. "He told me about a park near here where he likes to go when he's upset." Emma looked at Lucas in surprise. "Have you guys been talking?" "A little," Lucas admitted, blushing slightly. "Through WhatsApp." "Mostly." Michael felt a twinge of hope. "That's great, son. Can you take us to that park?" As they headed to the location Lucas had indicated, Michael couldn't help but notice a dark car that seemed to have been following them ever since they left Emma's apartment. His instincts screamed that something was wrong. In the park, they found Samuel sitting on a swing, looking at the horizon. When he saw them approaching, the boy stood up, ready to run away again. "Samuel, wait!" Michael shouted, running towards him. But before they could reach him, two men stepped out from behind a nearby tree and grabbed Samuel. It all happened so fast that for a moment, Michael thought he was having a nightmare. "Dad," Lucas shouted, pointing at the dark car that had stopped abruptly next to them. Michael ran toward the men dragging Samuel to the vehicle, but was knocked down by a third man who suddenly appeared. As he struggled to get up, he saw the car drive away, taking Samuel with him. "No!" Emma screamed, falling to her knees on the floor. Lucas, trembling, helped his father to his feet. "Dad, what's going on? Who were those men?" Michael, still dazed, tried to organize his thoughts. "I don't know, son, but I'll find out, and I'll bring Samuel back." At that moment, his cell phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "If you want to see the boy again, come alone to the old Emprendimientos warehouse at 10 p.m. No police, or the boy will suffer the consequences." Michael felt his blood run cold. The old warehouse was a place he hadn't visited in years, since the days when his father was still running the family business. What secrets from the past were waiting for him there? "Emma," he said, trying to remain calm, "take Lucas home. Lock all the doors and don't open them for anyone until I contact you." "What are you going to do?" Emma asked, concern evident in her voice. Michael looked toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set. "I'm going to get our son." As he drove to the meeting place, Michael couldn't help but think about how drastically his life had changed in such a short space of time. From being a successful businessman and single father, he now found himself plunged into a world of secrets, lies, and dangers that he barely understood. The old Emprendimientos warehouse was an imposing, somber structure on the outskirts of town. As he approached, Michael noticed that the security cameras, which should have been deactivated years ago, were blinking silently. Heart pounding in his chest, he entered the building. The interior was dark, lit only by a few dim lamps that cast unsettling shadows on the walls. "Welcome, Michael," a familiar voice echoed through the space. Or should I say, welcome back. Michael turned, facing the figure emerging from the shadows. His blood ran cold as he recognized the face. "Sir, what's going on here?" The chief accountant at Michael's company smiled coldly. "Oh, Michael, there's so much you don't know, so much your father has gone to great lengths to keep hidden." "Where's Samuel?" Michael demanded, his voice shaking with anger and fear. He made a casual gesture, and two figures appeared, dragging a frightened and gagged Samuel. "Dad!" the boy screamed as soon as the gag was removed. Michael's heart broke as he heard Samuel call him father for the first time under such dire circumstances. "It's going to be okay, Samuel," he promised, though he wasn't sure how he would keep that promise. He laughed, a cold, humorless sound. What a touching scene. Father and son reunited. But Michael, do you really think you can just bury the past and start over? There are secrets, contracts, agreements your father made that can't just go away. "What are you talking about?" Michael asked, his mind working frantically to understand the situation. "Your father," he continued, "made deals with powerful people. People who don't care about family ties or sentimentality. The separation of the twins was not an accident or a protective measure. It was part of a larger plan." Michael felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. "A plan? What plan?" He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "A plan to secure the future of the empire. 2 heirs, 2 lines of succession. One raised in wealth, the other in simplicity, but both shaped for one purpose." "You're crazy," Michael growled, taking a step toward Samuel. Ah, he warned, pulling out a gun. "Not so fast. We have much to discuss before this family reunion can continue." As the terror of the situation set in, Michael realized that he was about to plunge into an abyss of family secrets and conspiracies that went far beyond anything he could have ever imagined. The truth about his family's past and the fate of his children was about to be revealed, and he feared that the price of that revelation would be too high. The warehouse seemed to shrink around Michael, shadows dancing on the walls like specters from the past. Samuel, still held captive by his henchmen, looked at Michael with a mixture of fear and hope in his eyes. "What purpose?" Michael asked, his voice shaking with suppressed anger. "What insane plan is this that would justify separating 2 brothers?" He smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Your father, Daniel, was a visionary, Michael. He knew that to maintain and expand, The empire he built, he would need special heirs. Special how? Michael asked, feeling a knot in his stomach. One raised in wealth, knowing the ins and outs of power and business. The other raised in simplicity, developing empathy and connection with the people, he explained, gesturing, with his gun. Two sides of the same coin, ready to take on not only the business but also the political influence that their father cultivated for decades. Michael felt a wave of nausea as he realized the magnitude of the plan. You planned our lives before we were even born? We planned the family's future, he corrected. His wife Carol found out part of the plan. That's why she tried to hide one of the babies. But she didn't know everything. Samuel, who had been listening to everything silently, finally spoke. So, everything was a lie. Even he, my mother's love. He looked at the boy with an almost pitying expression. Emma was part of the plan, kid. She was handpicked to raise you, to shape your character the way we needed. Michael saw Samuel's world crumble before his eyes. The boy seemed to have aged years in a matter of seconds. No, Michael screamed. I refuse to believe Emma is part of this. Her love for Samuel is real. I know it. He shrugged. Perhaps. Feelings have an inconvenient habit of complicating even the best-laid plans, but that doesn't change the fact that you two, he gestured at Michael and Samuel, are key players in a much larger game. And what happens now? Michael asked, trying to buy time while his mind worked on an escape plan. Now, he said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, you have a choice to make, Michael. Accept your role in this plan, take full control of the business and political influence your father has built, or... He didn't need to finish the sentence. The threat was clear in the heavy air of the warehouse. At this moment, the sound of glass breaking echoed throughout the space. Everyone turned to see Lucas, who had secretly followed his father, knocking over a pile of old boxes. "Lucas!" Michael shouted, horrified to see his son there. The moment of distraction was all Samuel needed. With a strength that surprised even himself, he broke free from the men holding him and ran toward his brother. Taken by surprise, pointed the gun at the boys. Michael, acting on pure paternal instinct, threw himself at the accountant, knocking him to the floor. The gun went off, the bullet ricocheting off the metal walls of the warehouse. "Run!" Michael yelled at the boys as he struggled to contain himself. Lucas and Samuel didn't need to be told twice. They ran toward the exit, hand in hand, united by the danger and the brotherly bond that was beginning to form. Michael managed to disarm him, but the other men were already closing in. He knew he didn't stand a chance against all of them. At that moment, the warehouse doors burst open with a bang. Siren lights flooded the space, and authoritative voices shouted, "Federal police, everyone stop!" Michael looked around, confused. He hadn't called the police. How? Emma rushed in, followed by several heavily armed officers. "Michael! Boys!" As the police overpowered them and their henchmen, Emma ran to hug Samuel and Lucas, tears streaming down her face. "How?" Michael began to ask. Emma interrupted him. "I knew you would do something stupid and heroic, so I called an old friend in the federal police. Michael, I've been collecting evidence about your father's and illegal activities for years. I've just been waiting for the right moment to act." Michael looked at her, a mixture of surprise and gratitude in his eyes. "So you were never part of their plan?" Emma shook her head, a sad smile on her lips. "At first, yes, but the moment I held Samuel in my arms for the first time, I knew I couldn't be a part of this. I've spent the last 10 years trying to protect him and gather evidence to bring down this conspiracy." Samuel, still hugging Emma, looked at her with teary eyes. "So, you really love me?" "More than anything in this world," Emma replied, kissing the top of the boy's head. Michael joined in the hug, pulling Lucas along. There, in the midst of the chaos, sirens and flashing lights, a broken family began to reconnect. An agent approached. "Michael, sir, we will need your statement. We have much to investigate regarding the activities of your father and his associates." Michael nodded, knowing that the next few days, weeks, and perhaps months would be difficult. There would be interrogations, investigations, possibly even lawsuits. The name that had for so long been synonymous with power and respect would now be associated with one of the biggest business and political scandals in the country. But looking at Emma, Samuel, and Lucas, Michael felt a certainty he hadn't felt in a long time. No matter what came their way, they would face it together, as a family. As they were escorted out of the warehouse, Michael couldn't help but think of Carol. She had given her life to protect her children, to try to keep them from becoming pawns in a cruel game of power. Now, finally, her sacrifice would not be in vain. The sky was beginning to lighten on the horizon, the first ray of sunlight breaking through the clouds. It was a new day, the beginning of a new journey for the family. A journey of healing, of rediscovery, and above all, of love. But, as Michael watched him being led away in handcuffs, he couldn't help but notice the defiant look in the accountant's eyes. A look that clearly said, "This isn't over yet." And Michael knew, deep in his heart, that the fight to protect his family was far from over. The secrets of the past had been revealed, but the shadows they cast into the future were still long and threatening. With a deep sigh, Michael hugged his children tighter. Whatever challenge lay ahead, they would face it together. The truth had set them free, but it had also made them targets. And now more than ever, they would need each other to survive what lay ahead. The weeks that followed the incident in the warehouse were a whirlwind of emotions and changes for the family. The mansion, once a symbol of power and prestige, now felt strangely empty and cold. Michael decided it was time for a new beginning, away from the shadows of the past. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, Michael, Emma, Lucas, and Samuel were gathered on the porch of a newly acquired beach house on the coast of São Paulo. The sound of the waves crashing gently in the background, creating an atmosphere of peace that contrasted sharply with the chaos of the last few weeks. "So what do you guys think?" Michael asked, looking anxiously at the faces of his children and Emma. Lucas, who had been exploring every corner of the house since they arrived, smiled excitedly. "It's amazing, Dad. There's even a basketball court in the back." Samuel, even more reserved, nodded slowly. "It's different, but in a good way." Emma placed her hand on Samuel's shoulder, feeling the tension in the boy's eyes. "It's going to take time, darling, for all of us. But we're together now, and that's what matters." Michael watched Emma and Samuel interact with a mixture of gratitude and guilt. Despite all the revelations, the bond between the two was undeniable. He knew he had a lot of ground to make up with Samuel, but he was determined to be patient. "How about we have a barbecue to welcome the house?" Michael suggested, trying to lighten the mood. The idea was met with general enthusiasm, and soon everyone was involved in the preparations. Lucas and Samuel, still navigating the uncharted waters of their new brotherly relationship, offered to set the table on the porch. As he prepared the meat, Michael couldn't help but notice how the boys interacted. There were moments of laughter and camaraderie, interspersed with periods of awkward silence. It was a perfect reflection of the situation they found themselves in, a family trying to reconnect, balancing the painful past with the hope of a future together. Emma approached Michael, offering him a beer. "What are you thinking about?" Michael sighed, accepting his drink. "How we got here, all we've lost and gained." Emma nodded understandingly. "Michael, I know there's still a lot to be said between us. About the past, about the choices we've made." "Emma," Michael interrupted her gently, "you've protected Samuel all these years. No matter how it all started, you've loved and cared for him as if he were your own. I can never thank you enough for that." Tears welled in Emma's eyes. "He's my son, Michael, just as much as he's yours. I hope we can find a way to be a family, no matter how unconventional it may be." The moment was interrupted by the sound of Michael's cell phone. The name that appeared on the screen made his stomach turn. Dr. William, the obstetrician who had delivered Carol. "Hello?" Michael answered, stepping back a little. The voice on the other end sounded nervous, almost frantic. "Sir, we need to talk. There are things about that night. Things you need to know." Michael felt a shiver run down his spine. "Dr. William, I thought you had disappeared." "And I should have been," the doctor replied. "But after seeing the news, Michael, not everything is as it seems. There's more to this story than you think. What are you talking about? Michael asked, his mind working frantically. I can't talk on the phone, Dr. William whispered. Meet me tomorrow at noon at the Bella Vista Cafe. Come alone. Before Michael could respond, the call ended. He stood there for a moment, trying to process what he had just heard. When he turned around, he noticed Emma watching him with concern. Is everything okay? She asked. Michael hesitated. Part of him wanted to share what had happened immediately, but another part of him was afraid of involving Emma and the children in more complications. Yeah, just company matters, he lied, feeling guilty immediately. Emma studied him for a moment, clearly unconvinced, but decided not to press. Okay, come on, the meet is almost done. The rest of the afternoon passed in an atmosphere of false normality. Laughter was shared, stories were told, but Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Michael found Emma on the balcony looking out to sea. Emma, he began hesitantly, there's something I need to tell you. She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. About the call. This afternoon, Michael nodded, surprised at his insight. How did you know? I know you, Michael, she replied softly. What's going on? He took a deep breath and told her about Dr. Williams' call. As he spoke, he saw Emma's face pale. Michael, this could be dangerous, she warned. After everything that's happened, we don't know who to trust. I know, he agreed. But if there's more to that night, to what really happened to Carol and the boys, Emma, I need to know. Emma was silent for a long moment, only the sound of the waves filling the air between them. Finally, she spoke. I'll go with you. But he said to go alone, Michael protested. And since when do you follow the rules? Emma countered, with a small smile. We're a family now, remember? We got through this together. Michael felt a surge of gratitude and affection for Emma. He reached out, intertwining his fingers with hers. Together, he agreed. As the couple stood on the balcony, sharing a moment of mutual understanding and support, they failed to notice the figure watching them from the second-story window. Samuel, unable to sleep, had witnessed the entire conversation. The boy, silently, returned to his bed, his mind buzzing with questions. Who was this Dr. William? What else was there to know about the night he and Lucas were born? And why did he feel that despite all of Michael and Emma's efforts, his new family was still in danger? Samuel glanced at the bed next to him, where Lucas slept peacefully. He made a decision in that moment. Whatever secret Dr. William was keeping, he would find out. For the first time in his life, Samuel felt he had something truly his to protect. His family. Outside, the waves continued their eternal ebb and flow, indifferent to the human dramas that were unfolding. The full moon hung over the ocean, casting a silvery light over the beach house. A new page was about to be turned in the family's history, and no one could predict what fate had in store for them. Morning arrived with a soft mist hovering over the beach, as if nature itself was trying to hide the secrets that were still waiting to be revealed. Michael and Emma silently prepared for their meeting with Dr. William, each lost in their own thoughts and worries. Are we sure we should do this? Emma asked, nervously adjusting the strap of her bag. Michael nodded, his expression determined. We need answers, Emma. For us, for the boys, and for Carol. As the couple headed toward the garage, Samuel watched discreetly from his bedroom window. As soon as the car left the property, he turned to Lucas, who had just woken up. Hey, sleepyhead, Samuel called, a spark of adventure in his eyes. How about a little mission today? Lucas, still sleepy, looked at his brother in confusion. Mission? What are you talking about? Samuel quickly explained what he had heard the night before, watching Lucas's eyes widen with each word. We can't just follow them, Lucas protested, though his voice betrayed a mixture of fear and excitement. Samuel smiled, a smile that was very reminiscent of Michael's when he was about to do something risky. Who said anything about following? Let's get there first. Meanwhile, on the way to Cafe Bella Vista, Michael and Emma discussed their strategies and concerns. If things get weird, Michael instructed, you leave immediately and call the police. I don't want to risk your safety. Emma rolled her eyes. Michael, we're in this together, remember? Besides, I think I can take better care of myself than you can." The comment drew a reluctant smile from Michael, easing some of the tension in the air. Arriving at the cafe, a charming establishment with outdoor seating, Michael and Emma chose a strategic spot from which they could observe all the entrances. Dr. William had not yet arrived. "2 coffees, please," Michael asked the waiter, his eyes constantly scanning the room. Little did they know that a few tables away, partially hidden by a large potted plant, Samuel and Lucas were watching everything, using menus as a disguise. "I can't believe we managed to get here before them," Lucas whispered, a mix of awe and nervousness in his voice. Samuel smiled, proud of his improvised plan to catch a taxi right after his parents left. "Now quiet. We need to hear what they're going to say." The minutes dragged by. Michael checked his watch every few seconds, his anxiety growing. Emma, for her part, maintained an outward calm, though her fingers drumming on the table betrayed her own tension. Finally, at 12:10, a middle-aged man with grey hair and wire-rimmed glasses walked into the cafe. His eyes scanned the room until they found Michael and Emma. With hesitant steps, he approached their table. "Sir?" he asked, his voice shaking. Michael stood, extending his hand. "Dr. William, I presume. Please sit down." The doctor took his seat, looking around nervously before speaking. "Sir, Mrs., I appreciate you coming. What I have to tell you, but well, it's not easy." "We're listening," Emma encouraged, her voice surprisingly gentle. Dr. William took a deep breath. "The night your children were born, it wasn't like they told you. Carol, your wife, she didn't die during childbirth." Michael felt like he had been punched in the stomach. "What? But how we buried her?" The doctor looked down, guilt evident in his expression. "The body in the coffin wasn't hers. Carol survived the birth, but she discovered something. Something that put her in danger." Emma leaned forward, her voice an urgent whisper. "What did she find out, doctor?" "Documents," Dr. William replied, his voice barely audible. "About illegal operations, money laundering, even influence peddling in high levels of government, all connected to the empire." Michael felt the world spin around him. His mind struggled to process the information. "Are you telling me my wife is alive? That she ran away to protect herself?" Dr. William nodded slowly. "She begged me to help her. She said she had to disappear to protect you and the children. I facilitated everything. The fake death certificate, the body of another patient who had died the same day." Emma covered her mouth with her hands in shock. Oh my God, so all this time... "But why now?" Michael questioned, his voice a mixture of anger and desperation. "Why tell me this after all these years?" The doctor looked Michael straight in the eye. "Because she contacted me, sir. Carol wants to see her children." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Emma, sensing his shock, took the lead in the conversation. "Where is she?" Emma asked, her voice steady despite the emotional turmoil. Dr. William hesitated. "I don't know exactly. She contacted me through intermediaries, but she left this for you." He handed Michael an envelope. With shaking hands, Michael opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph. Carol, older but unmistakably her, holding a newspaper dated 2 weeks ago. On the back of the photo was a simple message: "Hydrangea Park, next Sunday, noon." As Michael and Emma absorbed the impact of this revelation, a few feet away, Lucas and Samuel looked at each other, their young faces pale with shock. "Our mother," Lucas whispered, tears forming in his eyes. Samuel, still processing the information, took his brother's hand. "She's alive, and she wants to see us." The surrounding cafe continued its normal routine, oblivious to the drama unfolding at that table. Waiters served, customers chatted, life went on. But for the family, the world had just turned upside down once again. Michael, finally finding... His voice looked at Emma. His eyes held a mixture of hope, fear, and determination. "What do we do now?" Emma, feeling the weight of the responsibility they carried, replied softly, "Let's go home. We have much to talk about, and 2 children, to prepare for what may be the most important meeting of their lives. As the couple stood, thanking Dr. William and agreeing to keep in touch, Samuel and Lucas quickly slipped out of the cafe. They ran down the sidewalk, hearts racing, not just from the run, but from the magnitude of what they had discovered. A few blocks away, they stopped to catch their breath. Samuel looked at Lucas, seeing in him a reflection of his own tumultuous emotions. "Lucas," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "whatever happens, we're in this together, okay?" Lucas nodded, squeezing his brother's hand. Together. As the boys sealed their brotherly pact, the midday sun shone down on the town, illuminating a new chapter in the family saga. A chapter of reunion, redemption, and perhaps healing of long-open wounds. The days following the revelation at the cafe were a whirlwind of emotions for the family. The beach house, which should have been a haven of peace, was now permeated with palpable tension, mixed with cautious hope. Michael spent hours in his makeshift office, alternating between obsessively analyzing Carol's photo and frantically calling contacts who could help him verify the authenticity of the image and the situation. Emma, meanwhile, devoted herself to emotionally preparing the boys for the possible reunion with the mother they had never known, or thought they had lost. On a particularly tense afternoon, 2 days before the scheduled meeting, Lucas found Samuel sitting alone on the beach, looking at the horizon with a distant expression. "Hey," Lucas called softly, sitting down next to his brother. "What are you thinking about?" It took Samuel a moment to answer, his eyes still fixed on the ocean. How everything changed so quickly. A few weeks ago, I had a mother and no father. Now I have a father, a brother, and maybe 2 mothers. Lucas nodded, understanding his brother's turmoil of emotions perfectly. "It's weird, isn't it? I've always dreamed of meeting our mother, but now that it might actually happen..." "You're scared," Samuel finished, finally looking at Lucas. "A little," Lucas admitted. "And you?" Samuel shrugged, trying to sound nonchalant, but his voice betrayed him. "I'm terrified. What if she doesn't like me? What if I don't like her?" Lucas put his hand on his brother's shoulder, a gesture of comfort that seemed natural, despite the short time they had known each other. "We'll figure it out together, okay? No matter what happens, we're brothers. Nothing will change that." The moment of connection between the twins was interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the sand. Emma approached, carrying a tray with sandwiches and juice. "I thought you might be hungry," she said, sitting down next to the boys. Samuel looked at Emma, the woman who had raised him, the woman he had always known as his mother. A wave of guilt washed over him as he thought of Carol. Mom, do you think she'll like me?" Emma felt her heart clench at the question. She set the tray aside and pulled Samuel into a tight hug. "Oh, honey, she's going to love you. How could she not? You're amazing, Samuel. And so are you, Lucas," she added, reaching out to include the other boy in the hug. As the 3 of them shared that moment on the beach, Michael watched from the porch of the house. His heart was torn between the joy of seeing his children and Emma forming such a strong bond, and anxiety about what the near future held. That night, after the boys went to bed, Michael and Emma found themselves in the kitchen, both unable to sleep. "How are you dealing with all this?" Michael asked as he made 2 cups of tea. Emma sighed, accepting the cup he offered. "Honestly, I'm terrified, Michael. Part of me is happy that the boys will get to know their birth mother, but another part, you're afraid of losing Samuel," Michael added softly. Emma nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "It's selfish, I know. But he's my son, Michael. I raised him. I've loved him all these years." Michael stepped closer, placing a comforting hand on Emma's shoulder. "It's not selfish, Emma. It's human. And Samuel loves you. That's not going to change just because Carol is back." "And you?" Emma asked, looking directly into Michael's eyes. "How are you feeling about seeing Carol again?" Michael was silent, for a moment contemplating the question. "It's complicated. Part of me is furious that she left us, that she lied to us all these years, but another part just wants to hold her and never let her go." Emma took Michael's hand, squeezing it gently. "Whatever happens on Sunday, we're in this together, all of us. Michael nodded, grateful for the support. As they finished their tea in comfortable silence, they both reflected on how their lives had become intertwined in ways they could never have anticipated. Saturday dawned cloudy, as if the sky itself reflected the uncertainty that hung over the family. Michael decided to take the boys fishing in an attempt to ease the tension and create another moment of bonding. While they were on the small rented boat, Lucas broke the silence that had settled in. "Dad, if Carol wants us to go live with her, what will happen?" The question took Michael by surprise. He looked at his children's anxious faces, searching for the right words. "Well, that's something we'd all have to discuss together, but I want you both to know one thing. No matter what happens, you'll always have a home with me and Emma. Always." Samuel, who had been quiet all morning, finally spoke. "But what if we have to choose?" Michael's heart sank at the question. "No one is going to force you to make a choice like that. We're a family, all of us. Maybe not in the most traditional way, but we are. And we'll find a way to make this work, whatever this is." Michael's words seemed to calm the boys down a bit, and the rest of the morning passed more lightly, with laughter and jokes as they tried, without much success, to catch something. Back at the house, they found Emma preparing an elaborate lunch. "I thought we could have a special family moment today," she explained, a little embarrassed by the extravagance of the menu. Lunch turned into an impromptu celebration. Stories were shared, memories were relived, and for a few hours the uncertain tomorrow was forgotten in favor of the welcoming present. That night, as everyone prepared for bed, a sense of unity hung over the house. Whatever their encounter with Carol might bring, they would face it together. Michael lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Beside him on the nightstand was a photo of Carol. He picked it up, tracing the outline of her face with his finger. "Tomorrow," he whispered to the image, "tomorrow we will finally have answers." What Michael didn't know was that in a hotel, not far away, Carol was also awake, staring at an old photo of her family. Silent tears streamed down her face as she thought about everything she had lost and what she hoped to get back. Fate had torn this family apart for a decade. Now, it was about to bring them back together. But at what cost? And would the bonds of love be strong enough to overcome years of secrets and absence? The answers awaited at Hydrangea Park, where the next chapter in this family saga was about to unfold. Sunday dawned with a surprisingly clear sky, as if nature itself wanted to witness the moment that was about to happen. At the beach house, the atmosphere was one of contained nervousness and palpable anticipation. Michael adjusted his tie for the 10th time in front of the mirror, his trembling fingers betraying his apparent calm. Emma entered the room, looking beautiful in a pale blue dress, carrying a small box. "I found this among the old things," she said softly, handing the box to Michael. He opened it, feeling his heart skip a beat. Inside was Carol's wedding ring, which he had kept all these years. Michael took it, feeling the familiar weight of the metal in his hand. "Thank you, Emma," he murmured, putting the ring in his pocket. He didn't know whether he would wear it or not, but he felt he should. Downstairs, Lucas and Samuel sat on the couch, both dressed to the nines, but with expressions that varied between anxiety and excitement. "What if she doesn't come?" Lucas whispered to his brother. Samuel squeezed Lucas's hand. "She's coming. She has to come." The drive to Hydrangea Park was made in tense silence. Michael drove, his eyes fixed on the road, while Emma occasionally glanced at the back seat where the twins sat, each lost in their own thoughts. Arriving at the park, Michael parked the car and everyone got out. The place was relatively quiet for a Sunday, with only a few families enjoying the sunny day. "Where exactly should we wait?" Emma asked, looking around. Michael checked his watch. It was 10 minutes to noon. "Let's go over to that gazebo." He pointed to a white structure in the center of the park. "We'll have a good view in all directions." As they walked, Samuel instinctively grabbed Emma's hand. She looked at him in surprise but squeezed his hand back, silently conveying her support. The minutes seemed to drag on. Michael kept looking around, his heart racing, with each person who approached the gazebo. Then, exactly at noon, they saw her. Carol was standing a few feet away, wearing a simple dress and a hat that partially shaded her face. Even after all these years, Michael recognized her instantly. For a moment, no one moved. It was as if time had frozen, preserving that instant of mutual recognition. It was Lucas who broke the spell. "Mom?" he called, his voice shaking with emotion. Carol stepped forward, tears already streaming down her face. "Lucas. Samuel. My boys." The twins ran towards her, all hesitation forgotten the moment they heard her voice. Carol knelt down, opening her arms to welcome them in a tight hug. Michael and Emma watched the scene, both with tears in their eyes. Emma felt a pang of jealousy at the sight of Samuel in Carol's arms, but quickly suppressed it. This moment wasn't about her. Slowly, Michael approached the group. Carol looked up, still hugging her children, and their eyes met. "Michael," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Carol," he replied, his own voice hoarse. "It's really you." She nodded, gently pushing herself away from the boys to stand. I'm sorry. For everything." Michael wanted to scream. He wanted to demand explanations. He wanted to hug her and never let her go. Instead, he simply said, "I think we have a lot to talk about." Carol nodded. Then her gaze turned to Emma, who had approached. "You must be Emma," she said softly. "Thank you. Thank you for taking care of my family." Emma, taken aback by Carol's gratitude, simply nodded. "They're my family too," she replied, her voice firm but gentle. An uncomfortable silence followed, broken by Samuel. Can we go somewhere to talk? All of us?" Michael looked around, noticing that some people in the park were starting to watch the emotional scene. "Yes, I think that would be best. There's a quiet cafe not far from here." The group headed to the cafe, an odd mix of family reunions and strangers meeting for the first time. Along the way, Lucas and Samuel peppered Carol with questions, their voices overlapping in their excitement. At the cafe, they chose a table in the distance. The waiter, noticing the tense atmosphere, quickly took their orders and walked away. "So," Michael began, once they were alone, "I think you owe us some explaining, Carol." Carol took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the faces around her. "Yes, I must, and I will tell you everything. But first, I need you to know, every day away from you has been torture. I never wanted to leave you, but I had no choice." "What choice?" Lucas asked, his voice small. "Why did you fake your own death?" Carol closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering her courage. When she opened them again, there was determination in her gaze. "It all started a few weeks before you were born," she began. "I found some documents in the office of Daniel, Michael's father. Documents that proved illegal activities on a large scale. Not just shady dealings, but much worse." Michael felt his stomach turn. He had always known his father was not a man of integrity, but hearing confirmation was different. Carol continued, "When I confronted Daniel, he threatened me. He said if I told anyone, especially Michael, he would make sure I would never see my children grow up." Tears were streaming freely down Carol's face now. "I couldn't risk it. I couldn't put you in danger, so with Dr. Williams' help, I planned my own death. It was the only way to protect you all." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with conflicting emotions. Samuel was the first to speak. "But why didn't you come back after Grandpa and after he left?" Carol looked at her son with a mixture of pride and sadness. "Because the threat didn't die with Daniel. There were others involved, powerful people who didn't want the truth to come out. I spent years collecting evidence, trying to find a way to get back to you safely." Michael, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "What now? Why go back now?" Carol turned to him, her eyes pleading for understanding. "Because I finally have everything I need to expose the truth, to end this once and for all, but I couldn't do that without seeing you first, without trying to explain." Emma, who had been watching everything silently, intervened. "What truth? Is this, Carol? What exactly did you discover?" Carol looked around nervously before answering in a low voice. "Corruption at the highest levels of government. influence peddling, money laundering, even forced disappearances, and it's all tied to the empire. Michael felt like the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Everything he thought he knew about his family, about his father, was crumbling away. "What do we do now?" Lucas asked, his voice shaking slightly. Carol looked at each of them in turn, her expression a mix of determination and fear. "Now we have a choice to make. We can expose everything, face the consequences and try to rebuild our lives. Or we can run away," Samuel added, understanding the gravity of the situation. The silence that followed was deafening. Every member of the family, both blood and heart, knew they were at a crossroads. The decision they made at that moment would change their lives forever. Michael looked at Emma, at his children, and finally at Carol. Years of secrets, lies, and separation had led to this moment. Now they had to decide whether to storm together or seek refuge away from everything they knew. The family's fate hung in the balance, and their next move would determine not only their future, but potentially the course of an entire country's history. The silence that followed Carol's revelation seemed to weigh down the small coffee table. Each family member was lost in their own thoughts, the implications of the choice before them echoing in their minds. It was Michael who finally broke the silence, his voice firm and determined. "We're not going to run away. We've spent too long hiding the truth, living apart. It's time to face this head-on." Emma nodded in agreement, placing her hand over Michael's. "I agree. We can't spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders." Carol looked at the two of them with a mixture of relief and concern. "Are you sure? This won't be easy. There will be consequences." "Consequences we will face together," Samuel interrupted, surprising everyone with his conviction. "We're a family, aren't we? Families stick together." Lucas, who had remained quiet, finally spoke. "I'm scared, but I think Samuel is right. I don't want to lose anyone again." Carol felt tears welling up in her eyes, overcome by the union of her reconstituted family. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't even know how to express how much this means to me." Michael took a deep breath, naturally assuming the role of leader. "Okay, so we need a plan. Carol, you said you have evidence. We need to make sure that this information gets to the right authorities." "I know someone in the federal police," Emma offered. "Someone we can trust." As the adults discussed the details of the plan, Lucas leaned over to Samuel, whispering, "Do you think we'll be okay?" Samuel looked at his brother, a small smile forming on his lips. "I guess so. After all, if we've survived all this so far, we can survive anything." The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Michael, with the help of Carol and Emma, prepared a detailed dossier of all the evidence collected over the years. Secret meetings were held with agents of the federal police, trusted investigative journalists, and even some politicians who were not involved in the scheme. The tension was palpable. Several times, Michael felt as if he were being followed. Strangers seemed to be watching them in restaurants and on the street, but they persisted, determined to see the truth come out. Finally, one Wednesday morning, everything exploded. The country's major newspapers were carrying explosive headlines. "Empire involved in corruption scandal. Dead ex-wife reveals decades-long scheme. High-ranking politicians involved in money laundering." The country was in an uproar. Arrests were made, statements were taken, and the name was on everyone's lips, no longer as a symbol of power and success, but as the epicenter of one of the biggest political scandals in the country's history. Michael, Carol, Emma, and the boys watched from a safe house, protected by federal agents. The weeks that followed were a test of endurance for all of them. Lucas and Samuel, united as never before, became each other's support, facing together the whirlwind of emotions and changes. Michael and Carol, in turn, navigated the turbulent waters of a relationship that needed to be rebuilt from scratch, with Emma as a constant and comforting presence for everyone. Months passed. Trials were held, sentences were handed down. The empire, built on lies and corruption, crumbled, but from the ashes, something new began to emerge. On a sunny afternoon, almost a year after the fateful encounter in Hydrangea Park, the family gathered on the porch of the beach house. Michael, looking at the faces he loved so much, felt a wave of emotion wash over him. "I wanted to propose something," he began, drawing everyone's attention. "The name carries a weight now, a legacy we didn't choose. But we can choose what to do from here." Carol, sitting next to him, nodded encouragingly. Emma, on the other side, squeezed his hand in support. "I've been thinking about using what's left of the family fortune to create a foundation," Michael continued. "An organization dedicated to fighting corruption, to helping victims of schemes like the one our family inadvertently perpetuated." Lucas and Samuel exchanged excited glances. "Can we help?" Lucas asked excitedly. Michael smiled, feeling blessed by his children's resilience and kindness. "Of course they can. In fact, I was hoping we could all do it together. A new beginning for the family." Emma, who had remained silent, finally spoke up. "I think it's a wonderful idea, Michael. A way to turn all this pain into something positive." Carol nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "A chance to right the wrongs of the past and build a better future." Samuel, always the more thoughtful of the twins, asked, "And what are we going to call this foundation?" Michael looked to the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "How about New Dawn?" "Foundation." The name was greeted with smiles and enthusiastic nods. There on that porch, with the sound of the waves in the background and the warmth of family love surrounding them, the family made a silent pact. They had survived the worst that fate could throw at them. Now, united, they were ready to write a new chapter, not just in their lives but in the history of their country. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, Michael looked at Carol, at Emma, at his children. The road ahead would be challenging, no doubt. There would be hard days, moments of doubt and perhaps even danger, but they would face it all together as a family. The legacy, once tainted by secrets and corruption, was about to be rewritten, and this time it would be a story of redemption, love and hope. Lucas, sensing the solemn moment, raised his glass of juice. "To the family," he proclaimed. "To the family," everyone echoed, their glasses meeting in the air. And so, with the clinking of glasses and the laughter of children, the family saga found not an end but a new beginning, a beginning full of promise, challenges, and above all love.